Hello everyone, another reflection of mine today that will end up straight in the Easter rain playlist. There was a tradition up to last summer that I broke for technical reasons that you're seeing every day while I re-upload the older videos that you inexplicably watch, sometimes even more than the new ones, right? Even though I could barely articulate a phrase in English at the time, or at least it was something just like before saying something, um, provided with a decent meaning, and um, and a general reflection, in fact, on the meaning of the channel. I haven't made any channel upload ever since anymore because to tell it all, things haven't gone super well. Like, the channel has kept expanding but at a lower rate, and this was uh, unpredicted by me at the time when I started re-uploading. I started Will Thing because despite I had received no strikes, whatever, but there were lots of copyrighted images that I was using, and even though I blurred them and I kind of hoped to make them pass as under the fair use idea, let's say, the the point was not so clear. It's kind of a gray area. In fact, I feel much better now. I see other channels that keep using copyrighted material in a kind of a, yes, probably fair use fashion, but sometimes they are entire knitted pictures from, in fact, copyrighted images that they can't quite use. And I always say, if somebody says, what, you can't use that at some point, that copyright is tightening at some levels. The World Wide Web has been kind of unregulated wild jungle for a long time, and probably the future is going to witness a much greater, probably ideological control on the internet with some boundaries. These are other reflections, have nothing to do with the topic I want to discuss today, but at the same time they are connected in as much I realize that the mechanisms that take place on the internet are very often weird, unpredictable in part, but they're always connected to the human factor that is also, in fact, the one that everybody would like to sort out in a way or another, and that instead is dramatically overlooked and underappreciated. In these days, I'm noticing that, of course, having severed the base of algorithmic views that were present in the videos I deleted to be re-uploaded, nothing went lost. Actually, there have just been a couple of videos I had to put in private, but basically all the 1300 are there. They have always remained. So I would hope this wouldn't change anything, but it has, right? So I'm experiencing lower traffic, and I hope at least that the algorithm will come back, because in fact what happened is odd, that people kept subscribing always, whereas the channel has received much less in proportion views. So this means the channel is appreciated by a certain degree, but at the same time I think that just the algorithm brought with itself an inertia, even with the people that don't really watch because of any particular reason that they see, of course, as it's natural, the channel just as first of all not particularly entertaining, because my content is not supposed to be entertaining in that sense, but also like just one of the others at some point, at some level, right? I get that feeling because I've always been skeptical towards anybody that speaks a lot, has lots of things to say, unless they're actually good things. And I try to make, in fact, my content meaningful under that criterion. And I believe that this thing will keep expanding and so on. But let's say I haven't just talked about what's gone on so far, and I see that the engagement is actually very low. And this tells me that, yeah, it's normal. It's probably it's 50-50. Like half is probably lack of interest, depending on the individuals. The other is just simply my videos are not showed. There's something creepy about the internet, the Google and both Google and YouTube search that used to say if you search the exact title of one of my videos, you will hardly ever get it, right? You will get other videos first that have basically nothing to do with that. And so if somebody really wants to search you, not just you don't show up first, but you have to dig into other stuff that really, you will get lost into. So there's this kind of trick for which I always said at the end of every video, please share my content, because I see that there's a core of people that watches regularly, and there are not just a few. And if they did share on a regular basis, this thing would simply take off on itself. It wouldn't need any other share later on. Instead, it drags on like in a painful way, telling the truth. Also because, again, from the stats, I see that even just the engagement criteria do not make any sense, right? People watch older, worse content more often by far than the best, more updated and more insightful, and frankly more interesting one. There are lots of problems regarding this, connected, in my opinion, properly to the view of history and the kind of let's say topics that the audience is more likely to engage in. As you know, I've always spotted this inexplicable bias towards migration era and Byzantine history, and basically it's as if all the rest did not exist. This is pretty weird to me. Like, as a PhD in medieval history, I can boast, even I can say it, I come from the top humanistic faculty in Europe, and that makes points that are comprehensive. That is, every single video is connected to the others, right? You can't kind of say, okay, well, this other video doesn't count because it's maybe, it doesn't talk about that other topic. They're all intertwined. Like, it doesn't make any sense to follow one type of content and not the other, because they're all interconnected. It's like when I made the Von Kriege series that I will resume, I think, hopefully soon at some point. That it's literally the cream of the channel. It's basically teaching the same method that I use to analyze military history, and people tell me, how do you study that? How do you do? I made a freaking playlist that nobody watched, right? Made 200, 300 views. At those ones got like 30, 40 views at best each video. Like, it's really, it's difficult for me not to use more derogatory terms to describe this, but it's like painful, because it's the same thing that I, in a way, it's shouting to the wind or trying to empty the sea with a bucket. Like, it's pretending that, of course, the world would understand things that people have kept saying forever, basically, since the very beginning, and nobody has it. Nobody keeps listening. Nobody, right? So, or just a tiny minority that at that point is an influence, will be overwhelmed by the mass. It is true that more recently I've started making more kind of manualistic, say, content about medieval history mostly, which was important because I often say, I think that we switched from manuals to more in-depth things too fast, right? I had stopped using the older manuals. Actually, I didn't even use manuals at the time, but there were things that I derived from topics that you could find on chapters and paragraphs of kind of basic manuals, and we passed immediately to the more in-depth things. Now I'm trying to compensate a little bit, and I think it's good, because it turns out sometimes, and that's where you become crazy when trying to understand what people really want, that something more basic would be kind of more appealable for most people. Like in the last year, I began to do something that was objectively more interesting on the ground of more specialized military historical content, battles, unit types, things like that. If you are more interested in that, please tell me, like, because I don't know what you want. This is the point, right? And I'm not working on that base, but I'm just following a policy that is influenced by dynamics that I don't understand whether they are, again, algorithm-based or audience-based. And it's always both, right? So I would always make just the content that I want and probably wouldn't follow your advice, but at least I need to know exactly what you're searching for, because I don't understand, again, with this lack of traffic is due just to mechanics or to free will in part. So I'm interested in that. And the topic I want to discuss today, however, is connected exactly to the idea of the necessity of the comprehensive of a comprehensive knowledge for a mature development worth of this name. And it's connected to the aforementioned topic because it has to do with this kind of selective interest that I see when at the point you see that the simplest things sometimes are things that are loaded with a specific it's not even archetypal meaning, that's the point, it's more like a functionalistic bidimensional meaning, are very often more driving than actually the serious things, the serious topic, the more complex ones, the more important, the ones that really make you develop more, that really have a point and need a structure, a complexity, or a reasoning to make, to sort out. And I understand it's more difficult, it's more expensive, it requires more resources, but at the same time, like, what are you living for, right, if you don't do something more complex? And in my recent years, I have, and Schwerpunkt has been accomplice to this because it has showed me this, not just statistically, but let's say has made me grow from a position where in fact I was kind of more similar to this kind of mindset, that there is this quite of a disturbing trend in the world nowadays that has to do with a sort of maniacal paranoia of trying to keep your world as small as possible, right? I talk with many people my age that are young but not so young anymore, so you would expect some form of maturity and responsibility and, you know, intelligence and achievement or something like that. And you realize that the main goal, right, in somebody's life is things like, you know, I want to be happy. First of all, the question is, why would you want to be happy? Like, we know, neurocognitively speaking, it's not normal to be happy, first of all. And secondly, it's not normal not because somebody prevents you from being one, but because, you know, it's not normal from a clinical point of view. Like, being happy all the time is just like that. There must be a specific moment, a specific reason makes you happy at the moment, then it passes, right? Like, it's normal for every human being, and it passes just because even when you accomplish something, that it ends at some point, and you should be up to something else. Happiness is not meant to be a long-term, but not even a medium-term feeling. It's often something very contingent, very temporary, but even in the range of a few hours, or not even less, or a few days. It doesn't actually, I don't understand why you would see that as a purpose. Also knowing that factually you cannot attain that, right? Because again, this is where we enter the realm of facts don't care about your opinions rather than your feelings, rather than, you see, we know that scientifically, and basically our entire moral system is also built on that. So, as always, morality and science overlap. You try to seek for something that does not exist, not because it doesn't exist on the ground of possibilities, but because it doesn't exist on the grounds of reality and what reality is made like, right? Maybe one day in some future civilization, everybody will be happy. Haha, I'm so happy all the time. At this point, it's impossible. Not because there is the war in Ukraine, not because the economy sucks, but because we are freaking mortals. We have a pretty tragic existence, and it's meant to end badly, and it's kind of like that. There can be happy moments in the meanwhile, but it's not happiness is not a point of arrival. It's never been. And even if it were, what is that you would have attained that, couldn't be improved further for you to struggle to try to improve your situation? Because that's fundamentally the point. Frankly, all the people that I've met that were seeking for happiness were very often people that were underperforming properly in terms of moral capacities, because of an actual problem that had made them not unhappy but fundamentally sad in their lives. I've met people who had terrible, terrible youth, terrible stories. They had suffered abuse. They had terrible lives. They had terrible losses. They had been affected by certain pathologies. So you understand there, this person wanted to be happy, but happiness even in there is a false flag, you would say, because you see, it happened to me. I had a very good life, right? And I'm happy about my life. In fact, I say happy in the colloquial sense because, in fact, I'm not happy. And I'm not meant to be happy. I don't search to be happy. I'm really fine the way I am. And I'm okay with being like that. I would like better things to happen to me, like everybody. But I have really experienced one of those lives you can say, wow, you were very lucky, man. You had it easy. You had it well. You were supported. You didn't have traumas. You were healthy. You had opportunities. You had achievement. You had affections. It's fine. Right, but of course, I would like ideally to be happy. The only times I've been truly happy in my life, like that I was literally euphoric, and that's exactly the pathological symptom that you actually have with happiness when I was in love. When I was in love, there were some moments it was properly euphoric, almost hilarious, like an imbecile, because at that point it's tough, right? It's actually the same experience that you have when you assume heroin, and which I never did, but just know if you've been in love, that's exactly what it feels like, and you realize why people get addicted to that and also enter in other stages later. But for the rest, I've been happy again of my life because I didn't need to be happy to be essentially satisfied. When people seek happiness, it's because there's been something like a boulder over them that has literally shaped them within, with the illusion that derives also from a poor, in fact, moral and scientific experience in practice, that outside of their world they cannot sort out, there is something called happiness. That is, they see their, when for example, I've never really suffered in my life. Again, the only times I've suffered the most when I was heartbroken after I was in love. And in that experience, I learned that I was normal. I was okay. I was living my life normal. Then I was super happy. Then I was super sad. And when I was super sad, it was really a tough time. And I said to myself, I don't want to be happy. I want just to be back to normal, right? So to me, I have the suspicion that somebody who says, I want to be happy desperately, are kind of those people who are irreparably broken to the point that they can't even know what it means to feel fine and not to feel happy, or at least something very miserable that is to you, the ultimate objective is just to be fine. That is the standpoint from which you should just be able to do something else to improve yourself or to really reach your goals. And very often, again, these people were those ones who stayed under any point of view. They were deficitary, again, from a moral point of view, from a scientific point of view. That is to say, first of all, they had a terrible value system. Secondly, they didn't basically know much about reality or the world or themselves. And they built up this delusion of being happy. And I began to realize through my experience that this attitude is widespread. It's as if almost every person that you talk to go out, or even on social networks, whatever, try to meet new people, random people, and make an experiment and ask them what's their greatest dream in life. Like 90% of them will tell, I want to be happy. And the bastard question that I always make is, and how do you want to do that? And they answer always something pretty idiotic, like, I don't know, I want to control my health. I have to stay. I have to eat healthy. Yeah, because you will not get a brain tumor by 30. If you eat your vegetables, you think that's how healthy, how health works, or that you go to the gym and you don't get old. That's the limit, the scientific deficiency of these people. At the same time, how do you? And things like, I don't know, I want to be healthy and self-aware. What the fuck does self-aware actually even means? Right, what is self-awareness? That you don't have to be abused by other people. It means it really tells you tells the story of somebody who just by default was stepped over by other people rather than something else. What it means to be self-aware. Don't you spot immediately the paranoia? Oh my god, you have to be self-aware. Like it's as if you live in a world that you don't understand anything of, because that's exactly what this attitude comes from. And everything you have to be self-aware because you may never know what happens around you. Well, yeah, that's something that you should have basically developed by the time you were a teenager, just to be a sensible human being. Then what? How do you plan to be happy, or at least to improve your life significantly? No. Do you want to achieve any greater objective? What do you do in your life? And you discover these people are in a dead-end job. They hate it. They just perform the same routine every day, and they say, okay, but how do you want to really improve? Do you want to improve your situation? Do you want a better job? What's your goals? What you need? And very often, you talk again with, people who have problems, right? Because nowadays people are having problems. Like from 20 years to this point, things haven't really gone that well. The middle classes have impoverished. The average person is really nor just an advantaged one, nor a particularly educated one, to say the least. Actually, let's say the truth, that they're just the average person is a bunch of illiterate morons, and they complain because again they can't be happy. Oh, poor dear, somebody stole their happiness, and very often in these, because what did they do to deserve anything in the first place? Somebody were they stripped really by the evil system of opportunities? Like, what could they do? Because you see, this is always the thing I point out. Like, we may be in kind of worse times than before, but in absolute terms, if you don't have a term of comparison with how it was before in practice, and that's why history, as we will see now, is crucial, you can't really claim much, right? None of the people, at least in general, that live today, compared to their grandparents' generation, have it worse than them. It's bullshit, right? Unless, again, there are bombs flying over your head. This is actual, as you understand, but, in the realm of the majority of people living in the world today, let's be brutally honest, that's not the case. You have it dramatically, but I mean by magnitudinal scale, overwhelmingly better than anything that your grandparents could even dream of, right? We are arrived to the point that your grandparents literally were born in times where they couldn't even think things we are living like today, and that we're just assuefacted to the point we don't give a shit about, because we're terribly ungrateful and spoiled and worthless and devoid of any basically human dignity to this point. Just look at the average value system and what it's turning into. Not because of horizontal choices, but literally because of the collective sinking of any moral capacity. And of course of scientific knowledge at the same time. And the question is, even if you were in a bad position, where do you show you have any tool to improve your situation, instead than whining that there is some kind of situation outside that prevented you from having one? Because you see, again, if you just played video games in your childhood and you just had a roof on your head, etc., and you complain that somebody stole your future, you actually deserve to be poor and stupid and exploited, because you already had the minimum that was enough to make it in life, and you just spoiled it. You just threw it away, and you didn't do anything with that. Why? Because you were supposed to just do whatever the fuck you want without any responsibility, without any pressure, without any form of greater goal of saying, no, you're perfect just the way you are. I remember when I was a kid in the 90s, like, you had this terrible attitude. The worst parents with the worst children were the ones who told, my child is so special, right? He's more intelligent than anybody else. He's more capable. Where are these people today? Like, even if you can't recognize, if you know them individually, but just think about somebody who is born and raised in a household who just praises the kid for being just a spoiled brat without any form of behavior, literally raised grazing like an animal somewhere, and pretend and making this person believe that they're actually provided with worth, aside from the one that they have in potential, right, without any form of application. Terribly easy schools with no learning, parents that are basically, in fact, undereducated morons in the same way. They just have enough money for people in the third millennium to pretend that we have reached some, fortunately, some level of decent wealth historically per capita. But then, where's your commitment? Where's your backbone? Where's your skeleton? What are you made of, right? We have deprived an entire generations of this. I think that I live this on my skin as well, because again, as I was saying before, I think I am relatively successful in relative terms compared to other people. But first of all, I was lucky. Secondly, I kind of worked hard myself for achieving some of these important results. Third, I always thought about this whole thing. Like, I never said, okay, well, this is just gonna happen, right? My future is promised. I will just have it. But in part, I've always felt, again, in fact, that this was kind of told to us, that things would always go well, that stories would always have an happy ending, that, we shouldn't worry about anything, we shouldn't just enjoy life, do whatever you want, don't worry, don't study too much, because otherwise you will you will lose the fantastic world that is outside. Yes, we have seen what the world has accomplished through this, right? You think that we live in any better time because of that? I would like to be surrounded by scientists, not by morons, but this doesn't seem to be a reality. Of course, not everybody can be a scientist, but I think that the cost of what I attained to be a scientist, let's say, could have been easily spent, instead than endless hours, in fact, attached to video games or to iPhones or to doing nothing, watching Netflix and other bullshit without any civilization or artistical value, and just really working hard, like spitting your blood and sweating and tearing, on your own to achieve at least something that is, can be considered like politically and socially of some worth, like of some kind of level. Right, that I am sometimes caustic, and I don't like to be so, because I'm actually, I don't really live my life hating people per se, right? I just have this rhetoric that I use on here because I think that I can spur others to be better, and I have this idea that's a positive thing. And I see the world basically going completely in reverse, right? To this idea that not just, there shouldn't be just merit in the way we receive our due, but that also some sort of extra just because we are humans or we breathe or whatever. And not just this is denied, but they're telling us that the opposite should be true, that merit is evil, is a sort of tyrannic mean, and that it's of control of the terrible hierarchy and all this garbage. And the thing is bad because I think it declines itself self-evidently in reality, to the point that we have lost basic things like political unity. Not that there had always been in absolute terms, but let's say at least a common sense based on reason, on evidence, on science, on facts, on hard work. Right, not the opinion of the imbecile that gets on social networks and thinks that just because they feel in a way, picking one side or the other without any base, any meaning. This is the next stage of the thing. Like, we think that just being from one side or another it's always been actually kind of the case, but this was again for the underdeveloped masses to pick sides without even understanding what the hell was going on. And since again the masses have been elevated to a state where they can at least express themselves more or less freely, at least in the West, they seem to use this as if they were at the center of the attention, on the pedestal, that is shouting crazily at everything that makes them feel whatever. and pretending that that's some kind of righteous position. Again, without a solid moral, you know, value system and sound scientific understanding, education, you can't really get anywhere, right? You can't really have an informed opinion. You can't really have an authority competence, any kind of you know, of value, because that's where it really gets down to. So it's not a matter of being left and right. You know that I have my own bias as well, so nobody's perfect really. But even when I make these speeches, I try to be balanced on the ground, at least what I actually know, which I think to put out there, if anything, because I see that really it's not discussed anywhere. It's a perspective that is a bit deeper, multidimensional compared to the average one. And yes, I admit it, I have a sense of superiority. I don't think it's really deserved. I've always thought of myself really average. I think all humans are meant to be like, all humans have this basic capacities that if they exercise for a longer time, they kind of improve. But again, that has a cost. I had a path in my life that brought me here, and I realize exactly because of that what it takes to get here. And it's not even that special as you may think. But again, if this were in relative terms special for some reason, again, there's not much to party about, because even when you're in that position, because you realize that the rest, you know, if you're special by being at that level, well, this sounds terrifying for what the rest really is. And because you've been there, right? There's an advantage when we improve, that we always know how it was before, right? So at least by a certain degree, we in fact, as humans, we understand universally the same language. And the point I was making here, also, you don't know it because I don't make you see it, but there are pauses that I take between, you know, in the recording. It's never, I will break your heart. I don't make a single speech, right? That are fragmented, maybe can be 10, 1, depending on. Sometimes I have to drink, sometimes I just say something stupid, I have to cut it. Sometimes I don't know what to say, I have to cut it, etc. But and therefore I am keeping to lose memory what I was saying before, then it pops up suddenly maybe later, and so that makes me hope that I'm still not decrepit mentally speaking, because you should be aware that after 24 your mental capacity is kind of, at least your capacities to learn and fix things in mind decay dramatically. So learn as much as you can before you're 24, right? That's crucial for anybody. After that, it's all a trick. We are all playing with fire and showing off, but knowing perfectly that our brain capacities are soon to degenerate. In any case, the other point I was making is, today I finally made my rant about happiness. And the other point is, again, how do you attain that kind of capacity? How can you be just a more resistant, a more pertinent and capable and authoritative and solid and responsible individual? Because that is really the entire point of the situation. Who wouldn't like to be that? And especially who does like people who are not that? Well, you have to be honest. Who do you prefer? Do you prefer to be, now you have two people, let's say, and you're forced, let's say, to choose between two, or at least to make your life with one of the two. You can have both, but let's be honest. Would you prefer the person who is developed, thoughtful, insightful, interesting, polite, educated, also kind of, has opportunities, possibilities, or the person who was none of this, right? Some of it is earned, I give you that, and some is not. I mean, I give you this especially. But what do you choose, right? Just instinctively, right? The other could be like you could be the good Samaritan and helping the other to improve. I did that. I had the device of doing that with that's the type of woman I fall in love with, dramatically enough. And so that's also why my sentimental life is so kind of tormented, because for some reason deep inside you wouldn't expect it, but I do have that sense of piety, because I think that as you know, I don't like Marxism, I don't like communism, don't like socialism, but I think I'm pretty fair and square about the fact that the world should be like a capitalist, liberal, really meant in the European sense, not in the American sense, which means basically left. I mean, in liberal sense that you should be left free in a liberalistic way, right? World, you get what you deserve, don't bother. But when it gets to affections, to family, you live like in a, kind of in a socialist reality. I mean, with your family, you share things, right? You put things in common, you contribute proportionally, whatever. That's fine to me. So unfortunately, for some reason, I always try to help people that, generally speaking, do not deserve that. When I hope these people could be part of my life, I don't know what was going on with me in that sense, but it's important that the public face to be objectively set, at least on the, maybe it's just, you see, maybe it's just statistical, because if I go on saying all the time that 90% of the people are just, illiterate morons, it just 9 times out of 10, if you're interested in some, that's not a good expectation in general, even though you make selection in something, but in fact, it may be even more than a person of 9 people out of 10, right? So that's how dramatic the reality is. But it's obvious, I can say, with colleagues, with people I appreciate, even friends. You would argue that I even have friends, or even it's also, I don't know. My last ex was a developed person, but it didn't work because she was nice, very nice, I appreciated her very much in that sense. But at the same time, I didn't love her, so it was kind of odd. But I still estimate enormously this person. So you obviously pick the best, and it should, don't you see that it's kind of an obvious realization? You want to be with better people. You want to be with the worst ones. So that I don't understand I mean, at least from a rational point of view, then there may be something that is based on, again, maybe the sentimental example is bad because, again, it touches so many different points from the normal hierarchy that it gets to the bottom of it. Say that doesn't quite maybe serve as an example, but let's say in general, I do despise. I mean, if I go in the street and I see an angry mob of, I don't know, or something that the average is what it is. Really, of course, I don't like them. I hate even going out because every time I go out, I'm horrified by the sight of the people I meet. I am extremely picky and terrifying myself in that sense because I'm brutal. I have a very low agreeableness. I even have good social skills. You would be surprised by, but I just can't stand people. I can tell you from my own side, it's really terrifying because I say, what the hell can I cope with in my life at some point, right? That's a real problem I pose myself. But at the same time, I shouldn't. I say myself, I tell myself I shouldn't give up these standards, because if I give up these standards, I give up everything. I give up my principles, my beliefs, my faith, everything. Because these things have been built on solid ground. They're not wishful thinking, right? And when these things waver, it's because you're being led astray by something else, right? When you're tricked, when you even maybe fall in love, your brain starts functioning in a different way. Then you start reasoning again, and you say, wait a minute, I've been fooled by something so trivial like feelings. I was not strong enough and super mystic enough and clear and reasonable and Apollonian enough, again, to tame my inner demon and to elevate myself next to the gods, right? As a transfigured hero. Like, that's really the clarity, and no other faculty fundamentally derives but from that attitude. So what surprises me in all this, and I'm getting to the point of the video, is how still the prejudice about the uselessness of I don't like the term myself, humanistic subjects is present. In fact, is today in our world, especially in the West, and especially in a certain type of allegedly, in fact, self-aware and kind of allegedly developed and even advantaged and privileged reality really is, right? We have created a world that is crudely and maniacally and almost paranoidally obsessed with the idea that there is no other important thing to do but kind of with your life, but kind of hard scientific attitude. As you know, I am a fan of science. I always say that there is, and this is the title of the video after all, that there can't be anything scientific without anything moral and vice versa. That is to say, morality and science collimate. And I think that history, I made several videos about this in this terrain playlist, actually proves this in straight away, because it really shows you, it really tests your judgment and understanding at the same time, right? You cannot really separate the two when you study history, right? Whereas it's very difficult to do when you just reduce it to a laboratory experiment where ideally there is no context to that. And this is a concept that really escapes many minds that reason in materialistic terms. This is not a scientific problem. This is a scientistic problem. This is the presumption that has been spread, especially from the 70s, in the at least culturally dominating or echoing, more echoing, in fact, universities in the West, for which basically any form of tradition was kind of bullshit, superstition, anti-science, repression, whatever. And the only way to liberate humanity essentially from itself, because that's the point eventually of Marxism and communism, is in fact the annihilation of any form of spiritual dimension, and therefore getting everything to strict material facts. That is to say, again, hoping that humanity would improve by just making a physical experiment and actively preventing it from knowing anything about anything political or military or social. Again, I have a huge respect for physics, don't get me wrong. Again, you cannot understand anything equally, politically, social, or military, if you don't have a sound physical, chemical, mathematical education, etc. But that's the entire point of the story. But it's as if, again, we were deprived essentially of the former element, the former dimension, in absolute exchange, and it actually forced obedience in a perfectly dogmatic way to the other. I made a video, was a couple of months ago, about how Marxism removed idealism from Western universities. There, I can't say it touched the topic properly at the core of it, but I already gave you a dimension of what we're talking about. You know that I have resumed kind of a more military religious side of the story recently, and it's probably very powerful in my historical narrative, as you can understand basically in every video. I always kind of had that sense, but in the last year or so I have widened it dramatically because I've integrated much more knowledge about the topic, and I'm still sorting that out. I'm still mostly sorting that out, how that fits with the rest I knew, that I realize was importantly biased. Let's say never actually, it never shifted into the materialistic side of the story, but it was closer to that, because I also, as an average person, came from that thing that I received from my educational system, that is still, again, a very good one, and that still, however, provided me with that unavoidable bias that I find everywhere. I'm making this video, I'll be honest, because I've been properly contested this. I said, look, I study things that are, because it was contesting that same idea. What do you want to do about your, I want to be happy, and how do you do that? By I try to be healthy and self-aware. Okay, and how do you do that? And I began to say, yeah, I think that that's not really what matters. What matters is not to be happy, is to actually achieve, and by that essentially growing stronger and capable of overcoming ever greater difficulties, and therefore having a much thicker skin and really achieving more easily what you want later, rather than narrowing your world, keeping it small forcefully, and pretending that you will not be wiped out by the hurricane, because at that point you haven't basically developed any kind of moral, cultural resistance whatsoever to cope with reality and its complexity. Then instead, again, historically, it's showed by itself. And here, I use the term humanistic to oppose it to the scientific one, because in a sense it's correct, right? It has to do with the humanities, etc. But there is, first of all, a narrative that has taken foot, especially among especially those hardcore conservatives of kind of American type, that I do like for some, in some ways, but at the same time I think they're a bit too, in fact, self-referential and kind of narrow in horizons, because at the end of the day, it's not they're conservatives or Americans, whatever, but they are keeping their world small too. Just like a leftist can do by thinking that everything gets down to race, and that's it, right? And that there should be no hierarchy, because it's all too complex to understand for them. They don't have the intellectual capacities to reach any kind of result. So everything that is out of that range should be destroyed, because, of course, if you don't even know what it is, you can't even know what meaning it has. So it's happening in the right and in the left. But in the right especially, there's this sense, if you're a true conservative, you're just, a cocky guy who just eats steaks and drinks beer and studies, mechanical engineering, because that's what true men really do. The entire elite historically in world history, the one that ruled over nations, that waged, that controlled, in fact, other peoples, conquered new lands in arms, and ruled over ecumenic empires, were primarily educated in humanistic subjects, right? And surprise, surprise, guess why? Because, of course, they are the single most scientifically challenging in the first place, and secondly, they are also the ones loaded with a meaning that has been expressed by other people in the past, and that turns out every time we make a scientific inquiry trying to really reaching the size and the scale of those systems, really particularly matching, in fact, with the scientific knowledge. This thing is contested, apparently. This is not true. You will never find answers in social studies. Well, first of all, if somebody addresses humanities as social studies, you understand they are just the bias and the ignorance of people, because, here we are Clausewitzians, we know that society is just an element of the Trinity. The other is politics and war, right? So if you think that humanities are social things, you are the one who has been led astray by Marxistic and materialistic ideology that sees only socioeconomical things in everything, and all the rest basically has no meaning. And of course, they're dramatically underperforming. They're collapsing everywhere, fortunately. At least I'm proud to live in a place where you can't really see these 1968 generation completely collapsing academically. And, people, especially also from a much right side of the story, with a spiritual ideal and moral and still, in fact, scientifically also military side of the story, are kind of re-emerging, because that's what an obviously healthy civilization does. And you cannot keep it under, because materialism per se, and especially Marxism per se, is inconsistent, right? It's just an incorrect, morally and scientifically view of reality. That there is no way around that, right? It's just pretending to study the world by studying 1/3 of the world and ignoring the other 2/3. Doesn't make any sense. It's anti-scientific. It's immoral. But again, nobody gives a damn, at least at some levels. But the damage is done. The average idea that everybody, humanities are somewhat connected to the Marxistic bias, to the socialistic bias, it's done for. And it's a huge problem. It may as well be that in the US, many academies have been taken over by Marxists, but this is not a problem of the subjects. This is a problem of the people who are there, and largely speaking of the community where they live. Because again, if you have a community where Marxism has a great prominence, this is not much about the dualistic clash against good and evil, in which you feel challenged. It's that the Marxistic side is the weak one. So what are the people of the other side actually doing? Like, you're less than that? right? Where are your values? Where is your tradition? Where is the power that has always managed to crash the Chthonic, Dionysian, Demetrian, Aphrodisian, feministic, communistic, even veganistic? Literally, look at what the Cathars believed in. It's always the same old story, right? It's always happened since millennia. There's nothing new about what is going on. Where's the other side? The truth being that in that community, as I was saying before, both sides suck, right? So there is nothing to be flattered of, because it's not like two sharply divided communities that you can't really, you can say, those people live for one side, one the other. They're product of the same country, they're part of the same culture, right? So if something went wrong with that culture, it's your fault as much. It's especially your fault. I mean, if you're really the superior one, really you can't whine. If you're a man, about the fact that this thing went wrong, and this is why you're vocal. So bailing out, becoming again passive aggressive, and thinking, oh, just that thing does not exist. It's true. It's mixing cards, saying, oh, it's not humanities. It's just gibberish. It doesn't mean anything. You're making a disservice to your cause, and the same reason why this thing is happening is the fact that you're too weak to cope with that. You see, when these things happen to me, I don't have problem to send people to hell, where they belong, right? Because they don't. I don't have anything to share with them. I can't try to fix the problem temporarily. But let's say if I see that the person doesn't understand, and it's always the case, I just let them go harshly, so that they will remember that, and so that they will not be fooled in thinking that this was just an anomaly, and that it bites, right, when you meet somebody that really thinks the way I do, because that inferiority is being struck in its Schwerpunkt. But the question is, if you give up the battle, if you pretend that what has literally made the entire meaning of your civilization and your beliefs, etc., is basically out of the story, that you have to become somebody who has a purely materialistic education, like it could be the one of an engineer. There is nothing wrong in being an engineer. You can be an engineer and having all the greatest values in the world, but those values must be taken from somewhere, right? And as an engineer, you will probably also get them, not through the books of engineering, that surely will make you more intelligent and more capable of fixing problems, also materially, practically. I, for example, suck at that by a certain extent, at least because I never tried. But more than else, you will be, tougher when you take that engineering knowledge and you will apply it to build a house, a bridge, a railway. And so you will interact with other people, you will see the problems that this entails, where to get the money, where to get supported, how long it takes. And you see the reality, the problem. You have to cope with humans, not with pieces of matter. And then you will expand your capacities, and hopefully you will become a great engineer who will do a great service to this world, because you will have mixed both knowledge of humans, of humanity, and of also matter, which we live. This idea that humanity, well, of course, it doesn't, there's hardly ever a happy ending in these terms, because it turns out that that's not sufficient, because also the average engineer, as the average philosopher, as the average economist, as the average historian today, is just not meant to operate along those lines, right? We are fragmented dramatically, our capacity of seeing out of our own box. And main of the reason, I would say, when I say that history really has a special place in all this, because it basically combines every form of knowledge, and that's also what we have overlooked up to this point, I still observe that, again, historians operate similarly, because still, they may have a broader understanding of let's say, of the complexity of political, military, and social issues, but at the same time, like if you just know a tiny thing, like 10 years of history on which you will not only write a PhD on, but basically study for all the rest of your life without studying literally anything else, not even the single year before or after that in that single province took place. Like, you you will not get anywhere. And this is mostly the historians that we are creating. And some historians are just like, they're not even historians. They're more philosophers or philologists or archaeologists than actual scientists, again, in politics, in the military, and also in society. So what I'm impressed by is that, again, as you understand from the thing I just said, that there is a scale difference by the sheer, not amount of knowledge. That's also materialistic nonsense, right? We are studying things, even like war, with mere amount of money or hardware. It doesn't really work like that. But more than that, the more complex the system, the more resources it takes to sort it out, right? So in order to sort out one, you will spend one. In order to sort out two, you will start spending four. And it's really exponential, right? So that's why I say that you can't just have a materialistic attitude or something that, in order to be precise from a material point of view, will get down to a laboratory experiment, out of the realm of which you just don't see much else, right? This is the point, right? Think about having a history book and a physics book. The history book is something that immediately fills your head with enormous questions, because the question is, everything that is said there may even be more, say, less difficult to understand in a tiny bit, like a date or a name, apparently. But when you start connecting the dots, you see there are infinite possibilities that exceed enormously it really fueled the curiosity and also your own capacity of understanding of a certain phenomenon. That's why history is really a big gray area at some point you want to make sense of. And that's why people keep learning history, because they're immediately attracted by the thing that is not sorted out yet. A physics book can also spark you big questions about, I don't know, the universe, the ultimate things. But at the same time, these questions are within a specific context that is basically out of reach of your own capacities, and or when it is read in, let's say, in minimal terms, like to say, how did we arrive to that physical law? Like, what kind of experiment was done? You just see an experiment. You essentially just see a machine. You understand there is somebody behind that, but basically you're just focusing on a mechanical process. And nobody teaches you what that mechanical process eventually entails until, for example, you become an engineer. And you have to apply that just to a more complex system. Well, of course, same physics, spaces in enormous realms, so they are extremely complex again. But the question is, what will you be made better of by, I don't know, banally, and I want to be provocative here, reading the Bible or learning quantum physics? This is a provocation, and it shouldn't be a provocation, because by far from trying to make Christian proselytism with these examples, I'm actually saying, do you realize what the Bible, even from a historical, religious, philological, even actual, like everything that you can think of, that enormous amount of material that dates to so far back in time, can lead you to understand about humanity, as opposed to something that you can surely derive a lot of interesting information on in a very complex system, but that still will be largely inapplicable, especially from an individual point of view. You can become the vessel of how to apply quantum physics to, I don't know, a certain technology. But the question is, again, will you have learned to be a more morally resistant person? Maybe, yes, learning the fact that there is an evidence, like the scientific method per se, that is really what really should be the entire scientific world revolving on more, right? Rather than thinking of science as a box of knowledge that you have to take as a sort of dogma, without understanding scientifically the true sap of science, that thing is always changing, because we're always discovering something new, and that it doesn't change on the base of, the fact that you can say, like from the other side they do science, so it's imperfect. No, it doesn't mean anything. It's all something else. That you need that kind of thinking as well. You have to be skeptical by a certain degree, but you also, of course, can be built up morally by you will and you must by the scientific method, right? And that's why I say that there is no such thing like any understanding of humanity without science. In fact, I think one of the greatest problems why historians suck nowadays, philosophers suck nowadays, archaeologists suck nowadays, is that they don't really have a scientific education. These are people that, maybe enlist in these faculties because they don't have to study maths. Literally, I found these people. It's disgusting because, again, you understand, first of all, they're not driven by any interest or any predisposition, any progressed knowledge or understanding or background that should be cultivated since a very early age, right? Or motivation to keep studying that stuff. 3 years or 5 years of history are nothing for a true historian, right? They don't mean anything, right? They're just a baby playing, nothing else. Because they don't know science. They don't know science. These people want to avoid the hardcore logic and rationale of the scientific method. And that's why so many historians, again, they talk about everything other than reality-wired things. The reason why I'm a military historian is that I received a consistent scientific education. That I studied things that most of my peers hadn't before. And I have, therefore, paradoxically, a less discursive, less historiographical, less obsequious narrative and dialectics. In other words, I'm not into that kind of history of, made by names of scholars or something that, must be revered because they wrote. I want the actual evidence. I want to work on the sources, not on the perspectives. Because you can't get any good perspective if you're based already on somebody else's. You have to get a new perspective by understanding better the evidence, the sources, which in history, again, is not a laboratory thing, is constant chaos, right? You have to make sense of something that doesn't even have a base. And so that's why it's overwhelmingly superior to any kind of possible subject that exists in the realm of knowledge, because it basically doesn't depend on anything else but your own judgment that you have to build on the base of this massive, overwhelming problem, right? This enormously complex and complicated system that you have to create standards ex novo. If you're just put on somebody else's track, as it could be by scholarship or even just by, and this happens in the hard sciences all the time. You think that the realm of hard science is populated by open-minded people who just are, accepting other perspectives because they're so, scientifically biased that they truly know how to do it. They hate each other guts. They are absolutely, totalitarian schools that hate each other, want to constantly destroy each other because they don't want the other to actually know what they are into. They want to monopolize the control of, right? It's something disgusting. In fact, this becomes more evident even in the historical realm when things get simpler in part, at least in theory, when there is scarce evidence. If you go back into prehistorical history or even archaeology by a certain extent, this attitude also is present. As historians, especially as medievalists, etc., the modern age and contemporary history just, fly off in a form of vagueness because they have to control so much that they factually can't do anything about that. And so it's a completely different problem, but it's even a more serious one than you think, again, because there are also things that are happening now. So in order to understand history, you must be I can't say that, again, every mind is different, so you can't make such brutal categories about this, but there are some kind of different attitudes depending on the year in which you study. But it's so evident that the least the quantity of evidence that you want to narrow down again to focus just from okay, this is the hard proof and we got it, the more ideological it becomes. Because you're so focused on that small side of the story that you basically lose the habit and the capacity to compare it even to something that is dramatically close in that scientific realm, but you basically are not, again, habituated to cope with, comparative. History forces you brutally to do so, and especially it does it by studying humanity. You study humans. You study what they did, and what they did, by the way, for real. So you don't study, I don't know, two atoms colliding. You study how two fundamentally inexplicable systems, like two people's brains, about which we don't understand absolutely anything from any scientific point of view, operate against each other. And the only way we can understand this is actually through our human experience, right? You can't even understand how a brain works by a certain default, but this has nothing to do with understanding where thought originates, where life originates. We don't know, and how especially this thing works and will work. You cannot predict that. It's the same reason why you cannot predict really politics or war or society, because these things change continuously at a rate that you can't simply reach, because you don't know even a minimal part of what you should know in order to make it work. And the only way for hoping to have a positive approach to it is studying as much of this stuff as possible, very often from the top, not really from the bottom up, because that is that's what eventually you should be doing when you want to really become the expert who climbs up to the top from really all the evidence you can collect, so to dominate that kind of mountain, right? But again, it's really tough, right? It's really difficult, because you can do that maybe quantitatively, considering the amount of sources for ancient times or medieval times, but just think about doing this, study the political, the economical policy, let's say, of Belgium. You have to study a freaking lot before understanding the economical policy of Belgium and all the implications, how this affects it, even if it seems to you something like, what the hell, an example have you brought up? Well, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's something that you maybe doesn't quite even seem to be important to you, and instead it is, right? And affects, even as compared to all the economical policies in the world, just a small part of the thing. But still, it does make an enormous difference. And this difference has to be documented, has to be properly evidenced. How this affects the system, which is a large system, because how many people really depend on that? Where do you put the limit of that inquiry? And how do you think this, again, can be positively used in the future? And how do you combine that with all the rest of the system? These are enormous questions that really emerge just when you understand that for you, that maybe that policy actually affects you really at an important level. So you can imagine how, where's the hard scientific aspect in there? Where's the capacity of understanding that if you don't have, again, a political or military or social understanding? That's very difficult, right? It can't be acquired cheaply, right? You can't simply become a matters expert, a materialistic expert, let's say better, and pretending that reality will bend to essentially an infinitely small factor, like the only one that you're basically looking at, even if they were 100 at that time. And therefore, when I feel this tension towards anybody by saying, did you know that there is a connection between the Indo-European tripartite social order and the Clausewitzian Trinity, and this is really affecting your life and you don't know it, and the entire meaning of the universe could be revolving around that? You say,
of course, people don't even know what you're talking about, so maybe it's normal to get them, puzzled in a way, if it wasn't for the fact that the response is, you will not find answer in social things. You will never find answers in your profession. Look at something else. Yeah, I wonder what you're looking at, right? Honestly, and obviously they never say what they look at because they are really looking at nothing, right? And those are same people who say, I want to keep my world small. I want to be happy because I want to keep my health well. Yes, because you know how to predict your health, or to effectively not age or die, or or at least being super smart to avoid consistently a form of disease. By what, right? I personally don't have any vice. Like, I'm not overweight. I'm in shape. I don't eat much of salty fat or fried stuff. I mean, I do eat them, but I even eat maybe too much of that, but I don't have. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't use drugs. That's it. Is it a big accomplishment? Like, you think if the person refers to that, is this a big deal, right? Basically, not behaving like a freaking animal, and realizing that if you get too fat, you will get a stroke by 50, or that maybe you will get a stroke anyway at 50, but that at least you will have avoided some mental decline. Well, I don't think it takes a great intelligence to do that, and the fact that there are so many overweight people today that are really so because they're just a bunch of lazy ass motherfuckers that will also weigh on our sanitary system is not really an excuse for you to take that lame standard as some way of building up your own virtue. Your own virtue should be tending toward the absolute, and not just keeping again your words small about things that really are not going to spare you from major political, military, and social disasters, for example. As some of the people that are unironically knew that we're living in places that are suffering this, really were saying, right? And this is valid for everybody, right? And this is the same kind of narrow-mindedness that I've met in any other country, but especially in the ones that in fact are not much Western, right? If I could say that the same war in Ukraine has been sparked by the fact that yes, that there is a huge problem in Eastern and post-socialist Europe just by elementary cultural levels, and you can see it in Putin's propaganda or just in the average person's explanation of what is going on. But this is also in the West, right? What the hell do you know about the world you live in, right? I remember when COVID broke out, there were things, I don't know if you remember when it first arrived to Italy in Europe, right? And everybody was looking at Italy saying, how it will be in the rest of the countries. All the strange explanations. The Italians must have this because I really, this is not a joke. I really read a comment because in Italy there are small streets, and so people get closer and they get higher contact. I mean, these were the explanation. This was a person from I don't know. It could have been Canada or I mean, we have adult people who seriously and publicly pretend to explain the world like this. I mean, I would easily deprive these people of the right to vote. Easily. Like, this is not even just reducing the vote to the minimum of some standards. This person should be deprived of voting rights, because objectively, our politics and society doesn't need that form of stupidity in any possible functional level, right? So it's useless for us to flatter ourselves. We all fall short of expectations. We all fall short of ourselves, really, and this is the problem, really. But if we, instead of having a society that says, the tyranny of merit, we actually bar everybody from getting to university unless, for example, they're already truly and satisfactorily intelligent people. Again, that it shouldn't be geniuses, it's just being like this imbeciles, right? We would immediately have an order where the better people are at the top and the others essentially go to fuck themselves. I mean, who the hell cares about them? If they are so weak that they can't even handle themselves in this situation, they can be easily mastered and kept under. This is what the world has been essentially most of the time. Right, we're just we have just living this wave of kind of more liberal phase because of industrial revolution. People got richer per capita. There have been greater absolute forces that have been brought to kind of tear down the hierarchy before that also had kind of fallen a bit in moral standards. But it's not normal. Like in the world, normally there's a sort of feudalism ruling everywhere. And I'm not saying it's even a good thing. I think it's fundamentally bad. But the fault is not of those who are at the top, where effectively the people who are capable to be in power. The fault is the mass, of the rest that just could cripple everything from a moment to another if they only wanted that. I mean, they are actually doing it in a negative sense, but I mean, they could immediately rise themselves to decent standards, and they're incapable of doing that. They're unwilling. Why do you think that things like communism or Nazism or fascism, they're all socialistic ideologies? In fact, our world is so disgusting that you meet those people who tells you that National Socialism was not actual socialism, right? This has become almost a meme. Like the political science student will tell you that National Socialism is not truly socialism, and it's wrong to think it is actual socialism. And you're a moron if you think otherwise. And I have the titles to disprove you. I never say this, but I would like to see where these people come from, because it's not that you can't go out there and say everything, because hierarchy is important. Sometimes we should listen to people also because they are better than us. Not because, it should convince us, but because simply there is a hierarchy, there is a point of reference, and if you know that you're below that line, you have nothing but to learn. Maybe you learn something wrong, because the person may be wrong. We are all wrong at some point. But still, you should recognize your own inferiority, or superiority for that matter. With the only difference is superiority immediately recognizes itself, and not complain. Or at least complaining constructively. That is to say, I have this problem. Can we sort it out together? Yes. Do you see any of this attitude today? No. Because we're too spoiled. Because those who complain about the fact that they're poor and oppressed and whatever, they're not poor. They're not oppressed. It's all whiny, narcissistic bullshit. It has no dignity of human worth. And it should be prohibited. I don't think that, putting higher standards in civilization can make other but good. Right? There is no doubt about it. It's always been like this. All great civilizations were so because they had higher standards than the others. And they made them work. Right? We have arrived at a pathetic level. Right? Where people are not even able to make war anymore. Right? Where countries declare war to others without even knowing how it will, how even the minimal safety kind of assessment to just at least predict a core kind of reality about the whole thing. I give you the war is unpredictable, but hell, here we're getting to risking nuclear disasters, talking about power plants, not really scared about Third World War, but because there are countries who are so culturally underdeveloped that cannot even assess something like so elementary, like the major resistance of a country. I mean, how disgusting can this be? I mean, these are actual human beings that make these mistakes. So we can't be in the hand of these people. These people must go under, and they must go under quite quickly. And frankly speaking, I hope that at least for a safety concern, this will happen as quickly as possible, because if we are waiting for the average person to become provided with any worth, we're betting on the wrong horse, right? I will stay here making history videos for everybody. I will, that I just introduced monetization last year because YouTube started making ads, starting putting ads on my channel, unbeknownst to me that they do it because when you start making enough views, they actually insert that. But so we're not saying that they do it for free now, but still, like, because it's like, as the women that I fall in love with, I still give them a hope, because I still give a hope to humanity, but in potential. And I think that we must maintain that. But in practice, we have to learn to be harsh. We have to learn to give leadership, authority, discipline, obedience. We cannot go on anymore with the brothel that we have created. It's utterly disgusting. And this is not to say that any other people in the world has any minimal capacity better than the West. They're all below. And that's why they have always been. That the world is quite simple after all. Right? Civilization is not a matter of personal opinion. But absolute standards also are not. Right? So don't flatter yourself because you kind of have a Twitter account or a TikTok one who can post bullshit and pretending that you are part of this terribly oppressed racial group when you're just one of the most disgustingly spoiled and parasitic and undeservingly, individuals that exist around. Because you will make the thing only worse. Nobody takes you seriously. Nobody respects you. Nobody should respect you, really. Respect is earned. It's not just you by itself, right? We have, again, told too much to people that everybody's special. Actually, very few people are special. A very few. And it's very difficult even to say whether anyone is special in the first place. And that should be our only concern, right? To improve ourselves for ourselves and other people collectively. That's the only point. This effort has collapsed. You don't meet anyone. Look at any. You see, I'm really a balls breaker. I must tell you that. But in everything I see, like I don't watch TV, but when I go to lunch, there is somebody watching, and I have to watch it, unfortunately. But I try to alienate myself, and just look at ads. But even on YouTube, like you see this there are some examples I could even provide, but I don't want to mention single ads. But what do you see there? What's the prototype of individual? Go make this exercise. Go look, I don't know, commercials from the 80s or the 90s. Look at how much more value-loaded individuals were. Right, they were strictly defined roles. Apparently, at least by the 90s, the 80s, things were already, degenerated. I'm just speaking in relative terms, as you understand. But, there were specific roles or specific values. There was even something about tradition in there, the hardcore, traditional values of the past. Again, cheap stuff for the mob, for the chronic masses, but still equated to today's ones. Like today, order, any parvence of order doesn't exist anymore. Like you have this, promiscuous, ambiguous, undefinable, and undefined blob of I don't know what it's all. It's mostly a hermaphroditic, racialistic show of obscenities of people that do not even have like a common, clothe yourself. In a decent way, dress up as a freaking human being. This idea is forced to deprive the individual of any humanity, because the ultimate purpose, by flattening sexual differences, social differences, properly hierarchical values, is that you're deprived of all the humanity that has created those values. If you blend everything in, you basically say that it doesn't matter if you're shit, because everything is shit. So you don't have to worry about being shit, because to you that's normal. And that's what you should be content with. Except you will actually live like shit. Well, that is perhaps not really what you care about. But again, it's like in totalitarian regimes. Who the hell cared if everything was starving to death? They didn't know there was an outside. So that's why still people today think that some totalitarian regimes were okay. It's like why today, other thing, kids today, I think Generation Z doesn't have the palest idea of what things like, I don't know, the aforementioned Nazism, fascism, and communism really were. They think that these are some kind of memes or flags that they can use and say, communism was actually good. This is just the West that is evil. And what do you know about communism? Do you have any idea how people lived under communism? Like, have you ever read a book written by an actual historian? This is not to say read the book of that historian or that historian. We have arrived to the point where people don't read anything because they don't know anything, because their parents do not know anything. Because largely they come from backgrounds where nobody knew anything, but at least up to a few generations ago, those people were anything. And they're still anything, but again, they have been portrayed. Maybe it's a strategy. Maybe it's a strategy to control them better. I'm sure it is so. It is the new feudalism in a sense that is fueling that, but it's still fueling that as if these people were entitled. I mean, these are people who have some power. They have some money. They can make children. They can buy cars. They can vote, right? So these people are actually dangerous. They're not normal trash. They're actually active. They can cause massive damage. Right, and this is evident, again, all over the world. Look at what kind of governments there are in the world. Do you think that's normal? It's always the people's fault. It's always a product of their cultural underdevelopment. There is no other... It's self-evident. It doesn't even require an explanation. This is the most important thing. If you lost track of why this is the case, you're part of the problem. I'm not talking about the fourth estate for no reason from a certain time onwards, because that's literally the fourth estate. Before, the ambition of a person was at least to be a bourgeois, to have that kind of middle-class power, capacity, part glimpse of virtue in traditional, standards. Today, it's the fourth estate. That is, the worse you are, the least marginated you feel yourself. Because again, that group is increasing, even just demographically. In a sense that at least most people also reverse into that by a certain extent, and since it voices a lot through the media, etc., this kind of alleged pride that is actually self-hatred, it seems as if this would be normal, but it's not normal. It's never been normal, and you will see how this is not going to be normal, because in a couple of generations we know that the new generations will not have any contractual power. And the worst thing is that they will still have the resources for fixing this, but they have lost any moral cultural resistance. They don't even know where to start. Again, when we were children, we had an idea from our grandparents, from the type of culture, bullshit, as far as staters ourselves, maybe with the movies, with Hollywood. We had an idea of what, I don't know, even what World War II was, what the general dialectic, and with all the mythology, yes, also the historical distortions, yeah, there was that too, but at least we had an idea that it existed. The new generations will not have an idea that it existed either, right? I'm talking about the existence of the actual thing as it happened, right? Not the fact that at some point there was a Hitler, there was a Stalin, but what that actually meant. We had an idea, we had a kind of an idea. Maybe not even our grandparents that had lived those moments actually knew what had happened, because that's normal. You don't understand history just because you lived through it, right? We don't interview, I don't know, we don't make 80 years old teaching at universities because they were back there, right? We don't live in the 13th century. We have a massive historiography written by, at least in their respective environment, let's call them competent people by a certain degree. That are surely more competent than the mass. And the hierarchy does work in relative terms for good. But lots of people will completely live without any capacity. Just look at the narratives that here are emerging on the Soviet Union, even worldwide, right? What does for an Indian the Soviet Union means? Apparently Hitler is a very popular figure in India. This is real, right? And so, do you understand what it means? I have, for example, a decent respect for Japan. The Japanese people and all they meant for the West after World War II, etc. But there was an interview that they interviewed average Japanese people. There are, by the way, some notoriously one of the most xenophobic people in the history of the world. And it's funny also how all the anime and the manga subculture has developed, being attracted by people that would actually spit you in the face, and actually for good, considering again, the level that we have described, they showed them a swastika, and none of them knew. It was just a guy, kind of a middle-aged guy, who gave a perfect response of what the swastika had been. All the people there, all the rest, young people, they had no idea what a swastika was. Like, these were allies with the Nazis during World War II. They were bombed atomically, right? And they don't know what a swastika is, right? If we are to rely on the historical aware, you see, what's the thing? I responded in part this in that question you posed me. What's the West? You think normally in these stereotypes also about what the Soviet Union was, what Maoist China was, etc. What strikes me of the Westerners, in a sense, it comforts me, because it shows that at least the West does work in one thing, that it makes Westerners, yes, unaware of the rest of the world, and that's disgusting in part, because nobody in the rest of the world is also aware about anything, as we've just seen. Anyway, but at least the Westerners think that kind of in the rest of the world, they're kind of like normally advanced like us, kind of, right? When you talk to somebody, they use logic and reason. At least they attempt to. This is not like that. It doesn't work anywhere else in the world. You see, the reason why you think you can first of all afford to say something like I'm a Marxist in the West is that you live in something called a democracy. You live in places that have nurtured and venerated the idea of consensual government. You have the best living standards in the world. You have the best education. And still, you don't know shit about that. You can't picture that. The rest of the world is not like that. And the reason why it's not like that, and that you don't know that especially, is that you're never told to them. You don't know what they think like. You don't know better how they don't think like. You can't have a normal, logical, rational conversation in the same way you're habituated to among Western people with somebody that actually doesn't come from that group. Like, even post-socialist realities within the same West are completely different. Again, if you can't see sometimes I met people who thought, I don't know, that during the Cold War the West was less free. The level of social control was the same in the West as opposed to the Eastern Bloc. But do you actually know how people live there? Like, have you ever read a book on that? Do you know what it means to live? Even today, I have a Russian friend, and she's Russian from Siberia. She lives in Odessa right now. It's a pretty dramatic situation, and she told me recently something I already knew, but being voiced by her, like saying, you don't understand how lucky you are, what it feels, right, to like how lucky you are to live in the West, and what it feels in our countries, talking about Russia in that specific instance, where you have to be scared, right, every time you see a policeman, right? The entire reason why in the West this racist Marxist terrorist tells you that police is racist, wants to kill you, etc., is exactly because they want to equate. They're kind of aware of the fact that the totalitarian regime they would establish would behave actually in the way they're accusing the West of behaving, because they don't have any other strategy. They know that the level of ignorance that is so widespread and increasing in the West can make them afford to tell this bullshit, because the Westerners have no idea of how nightmarish outside the West is. You have no idea of what it means to live, I don't know, in a country with Sharia. You have no idea of what it means. And that's why you can afford of saying, the West is evil. Because frankly, the West has succeeded in protecting you from realities where if you talk, you're hanged. And this you cannot accept, because if you have built your entire life identity on the fact that you are some sort of marginalized, oppressed group, and that's the entire meaning that you give to your non-insignificant existence, you cannot accept that this entire lie can collapse. Because otherwise, you will realize that you have completely failed as a human being under any level. and you would just suicide yourself. Why do you think that suicide rates are so high? Because kids are picked on, or because, they're poor, or what? Do you realize how hard the world was before and why these suicide rates did not exist? Because people today are weak, and weak people kill themselves. This is the only truth that stands behind that. We have made people incapable of resisting culturally, intellectually, emotionally to anything. They're worthless. And we haven't focused even minimally to toughen them up. We have focused only to give them something more, take away any responsibility and pride and honor and self-confidence, and tell them that it's always something else that doesn't work, and that you're an angel, that don't do anything. This is how you create a devil. This is how you create somebody who is only able to worship itself, is not able to understand universal values, doesn't understand the value, that the need of a truth, and a single truth that goes beyond anything that you can afford to think really has. And this is, again, happening in every field. And there is a backlash that, again, from the conservative side of the story, is still guided by disgusting individuals. I mean, let's be honest. Do you know any conservative that is actually, a person provided even just with a decent education? No. In the main political group, no. They're just at best good talkers. They're intelligent people by a certain degree. They're capable, whatever. But they don't represent the best of what our world should be, of what tradition was about, of hierarchy. They don't. They're just average people that emerge from this mess, that of course are influenced by this mess, and so significantly de-evaluated in the process, that remind you somewhere that there were some values at some point, and that maybe the other side is is doing some excess. That's what I was saying before. Conservatism today sucks, because the mere fact that we had to resist to a leftistic onslaught is the proof that the other side was nothing. Because at least the left is less than nothing, under any valorial, scientific, or moral standpoint. And so, what are we even whining about? Why don't we have the courage of saying this or spreading this? Right? If you agree with this, if you actually believe that this is the point, if you believe that what I say is harsh but kind of fair, you should listen to my videos. You should listen to, I don't know, this is something strange that even some of my subscribers began to say. Look, Schwerpunkt, at this video, that you don't watch the Christian history videos. I've had, I think here, wait a second, there are some comments. They're saying that basically it is true, because if you watch the analytics, this is true, that the Christian history videos are not watched. I make 200 views normally. These videos make like 50, and they're only the ones about Christian history. The question is, if you, how do you think I teach history? Do you think that I say that it's just this is your problem? If you think that my content is just, today we talk about, I don't know, the barbarian invasions, or the Crusades, or whatever, and it's just like a content about that thing, if you think that the value of that video is the type of content, let's say, the subject in itself, and not the interpretation of it, reason for which you don't give a shit about Christian history, because of course you're an undereducated moron yourself. Let's be honest about this. The question is, why do you even follow my channel? What do you listen to what I'm saying if you don't actually even care about the comprehensive aspect of this all? I don't pretend you to watch my channel at all. I don't pretend you to watch most of my content. I just am extremely worried that you watch just some specific content, and the other, just because it's, I don't know what it is, Christian history, you don't watch it. how do you, like, this is a mostly a medieval history based channel. You know my curriculum. What the hell do you listen to any medieval history content if you don't hear medieval Christianity content? I mean, seriously, what do you think the worth of your are you an expert on Christian history for which you don't need to hear my content because it's like, you know, you teach that thing normally in your daily life? Or is it because you're plenty of prejudices and stereotypes and you basically know nothing about that because nobody really told you, and you really don't want to face it in your life, that most of your problems probably derive, at least they are mirrored, by the fact that you're not interested in Christian history because you don't even know what it is, because nobody ever explained to you. It was just a melange of, again, nonsensical slogans about things that you never open a book on. We gotta be honest here, because I'm honest with you. Like, are you honest with yourself? Because that's where it starts. You see, you can't really do anything in your life if you keep your world small. You're just behaving like a leftist bitch, trying to get your safe space. And I'll tell you what, that it's exactly those things that you avoid that are the things that would teach you to be a better person. It was the case with the Von Krieger series, they don't give a shit about, and that's the same reason why, you know, half of the people, when I even made a pro-Ukraine video, just didn't have any clue that I could be pro-Ukraine, because they thought, I don't know, this came out of the blue, or I decided to the last moment. But have you, again, if you had listened to those videos, you would have not behaved like a fool. You would have not listened for years to someone that you didn't understand anything about, just even for bailing out at that point. And isn't it kind of ridiculous? I mean, you basically gave me money and your time and everything for what exactly? What did you think this was about? I mean, I know that some of my audience is very young, that I can at least, now, if you're an adult, really, you're not forgiven at all. But let's say also because there are lots of adults otherwise that have the same complete attitude. But let's say this channel is not for children. It may seem odd to tell, but it's kind of evident from my type of content that this stuff is not flattering you. It's not here to flatter you. It's not here to entertain you. It's not here you to kiss you good night. This is in a polite way, at least, to try to give you a slap in the face and move your lazy ass. This is what this channel is really meant to be like, right? And again, if you don't like it, I prefer you to completely bail out than pretending that my content is what you think it is. Because as again, all my content is directed at making you see this is not a matter of personal opinion. And this thing will also expand. So the risk that eventually this will at some point hopefully take off and assume a greater dimension, especially if you agree with me instead, which may be rare, because I realize that I'm too harsh and I want to be harsh. I like that. The question is, how far do you want this to go, right? How much do you want to challenge your own resistance at the same time? Because this is the question I pose myself every freaking damn time I say anything. Because I could do much more, right? If tomorrow I decided to have 100,000 views, I could easily get them. I know how to. The problem is that would entail some massive responsibility that, I admit it, I don't feel ready, strong enough to handle. Right? This thing will be for a time where I will have sedimented more strength and more capacity, and I'm growing. I've been growing. But I really can't do more, and this is why I'm not stopping this. This is why I could say, you know what, this thing has gone too far. It's taking too much time. It's really not working. Nobody seems to be really aside from that hardcore of faithful retinue, man, let's say that this stand my side, this doesn't really seem to attract anybody, because you don't really see it from the outside, and I give you that. And also YouTube doesn't help. But what for? Well, I could spend the time I make videos also to make more articles, to more quickly, rise to the academic career. You gotta understand that I attribute a great value instead to what I'm doing, for you, essentially, to see that, right? And again, you're not obliged to see anything of this, but just be aware, if you do, also because you're spending time and resources for watching it, that this thing is meant to be more than it seems, and that I have that it seems to you or to others, if you actually get it. In that case, I'm glad, but it is because I still haven't gotten to the point. This channel is in its infancy still, even after all these videos, because this is just literally a tiny part. I mean, if I would like to make you picture the stuff that I have here to tell. I will not live enough. I will surely die before I say anything satisfactory thing. But in the meanwhile, we can do enough, and that's what the absolute that I'm trying to reach. Because I don't think to transfigure into an Indo-European hero to sit next to the gods, but I think that I can do something that will have gotten me closer to that, because I believe in what that can do, and because I think that life should be meaningful, with a purpose, with an aim, and this is often hidden and concealed, and that's why it's so difficult, and it feels like struggling sometimes, like anything in life. But that's exactly the moment we should be drunk of, the moment of the struggle, because it's only in the struggle that we elevate ourselves, and there is no other way out of that. So don't underestimate ever what history can do. Never. Never think this is a side dish. Never think this is like a B-series subject, that history, well, after all, there are more important things happening, or just, history is more important for the recent things, and these older things are not. Never make that mistake. Never make that mistake. You cannot afford it. You cannot afford your existence. Likely. Very likely. You cannot afford anything else. So be grateful for what you have, because this is a very important step, like to start from, to build a civilization. To be self-confident and to elevate yourself, not to be crushed by a superstition that looms above you and keeps you under, because that thing is your same self that is keeping you a prisoner. And you're not, in potential, you don't deserve that. You're not worth that. You're supposed to be superior to that. Don't fall. Don't fall. Come out of that instead. Trust me. So on these notes that are definitely terrifying, I would say that for today it's all. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time.